documents everything to outside information. It is really important to do. Who's this? Oh, Chloe, okay. And one thing really quick on this, let's talk very quick about a couple things. So in here, I thought most people did really well, almost all A's and B's. And usually the reason for the B's is just not enough outside information, just not enough examples, not enough facts. And you have to have irreconcilables and explaining it. Reservationists, Wilson, because about Wilson the loyalist, because the question is about the prompt or whatever you want to call it, about the ratification of the treaty. And a lot of people didn't put down that there was an actual vote and what happened. Talked all about it, but never talked about how close it was and it could have passed. That's one of the reasons why I just was basically kind of saying, okay, you probably wouldn't have got that last point because you didn't tie it all together with the vote and the outcome. You would have led to isolationists. Didn't mean you had a bad essay, but that's why they took that point off. And there was a little bit of summarizing. It's really easy to do. When I put down some or are, mean relate. You're just explaining what's in the document, not relating the document back to your thesis statement. You know, like document 1 really shows that irreconcilable position. Document 2 is a kind of liberal, we should have passed the thing. Document 3, Article 10, document 4. The cartoon, document 5 was Hoover, reservations. 6 was Du Bois, liberal. 7, Wilson. 8, the leader of the reservations, Henry Cabot Lodge. Had a few people not mention Article 10 either. That was such a big deal. And I know you're writing all the, trying to get all the things in. There's pressure. Once every single person does that. Once your pen hits the paper, you just want to get done. Especially at a time that's and it's easy to forget stuff. But you had to have Article 10, the 3 different groups, and I was really looking for liberal and conservative too. And those are the kind of outside information you have to bring in. But saying that, overall, they were good essays. And the big issue was the organizational things, but just not getting enough information, not relating the document to the facts. And it's really important for that, okay, they call it HAP, but that, explaining why for 3 of them. For example, the cartoon. McClellan had that point, or McClellan wrote a cartoon against the treaty because he was conservative and isolationist. You need to explain something a lot why for 3 of them. And when you organize this thing, I know it's very cut and dry. This is not creative writing. It's a time down saying you don't have time to reinvent the wheel. You got to get your facts down. I should have, this is really good practice for every other form of learning. Once you get this basic down to get the facts down, then you can expand on it. You don't have time to expand it. Sorry, this is the way it is. But for those body paragraphs, topic sentence that's in your thesis, quick explanation of it, like your reconcilers. 2 documents are your examples. So it's like a short ID. These are 2 examples. One of them you need that HAP, and then why it's important, what it led to, relating to your thesis. 6 sentences of paragraph. Oh, context. I had some great context. But one thing, and I know this is the way it is, like for essays, you've been taught this, and it's a little bit of going away from what you've been taught. But when I'm saying background, I'm not saying background to the issues in the question. I'm saying background or the cause that led to, in this context, the treaty. Things that led to the treaty, that led to the main point of the question. If the question is about the ratification, the context would be the World War I ending and what was in the treaty. It's the cause. If let's say the next question you get, I'm just throwing one out here, I'm sure that's no coincidence. The reason why the United States dropped the atomic bomb. The context would be the events in World War II that led to the end of the war, but Japan was still not surrendering, Germany had. Then you answer the question. And then if you have time, in that last paragraph, do context again, what it led to, like in this treaty, and a lot of people put this down, this was great, isolations. Conservative foreign policy. Germany being really mad. But overall, it was good. Good documentation. Most people did not summarize the documents in here. I was pretty pleased. So I took 3 examples, a couple from this class. And here is an outline, and it's beautiful. No, when I look at the outline, the reason I do this outline as I like to, I just want to see where you're going. I look at this, you're organized. Why was it good? Documents the facts. So I know that the person writing this knows I have to relate what's in the document to what I know. It's good. Boom, bosom, nationalism. Good organization. I know they know where they're going. I know where they're going. I just like peeking. And you notice it's just a few words. I had a lot of good outlines. I just gave one example. Oh, and this is the one that you add a little more explanation why the half, little star there. Very basic, simple. And the thing about that is, that probably took no more than a few minutes, a couple minutes to write, if that. Just that's all I'm looking for. I look at it, I know they know where they're going. If I see a few lines and an arrow, I could tell, I'm worried this won't be organized. They're going to forget stuff. Here's an example of one. So a little long, but good context. Talk about the end of the war, the treaty, Germany. And then I was into check marks for some reason. So check mark means good, got it. For some reason, I put 4 check marks for her. Didn't mean she was 4 times good. It just, and I chose this one, easy to read. But didn't really, the question might have been addressed a little bit more about the opposition forces, but it's very organized. There's the why, all about that constitutionality, about declaration of war. They're reconcilables, reservationists, flexibility of rights. Very good organization. I know they know exactly where they're going. Want to see one more? I think you do. This is DBQ. Okay, so good background. I really like the war guilt cause. That's a great piece of outside information. So that kind of stuff about the events leading up to the war. Very well done. Senate defeated the treaty. And then we have 3 good points. You know exactly where they're going. Very basic. I always thought the easiest would be just irreconcilables, reservationists, and Wilson, but I like the nationalism part. That's good. Opposition. Disagreements over the League of Nations really does tie, everyone kind of leans back to that. But I had a lot of really good ones. I mean, this was good. And so we are going to do one more, yes, on the dropping of the atomic bomb. And we'll do that about a week after. So we'll be starting the Cold War. And we got the spring break. The week after the exam, I want to save it. Week after spring break. And it's good. And it's just an essay. They give you, instead of you coming up with the examples, the documents give you the examples. That's the only difference. Now, I know you got to read them, you got to get them in. That's a little more stressful, but don't forget, just don't forget the fact that they're helping you. And that's the organization. And then you can mix things up a little bit, but just remember there are time limitations. And then right here, I'm into check marks on this one too. Oh, but I thought this was a really good example of the why. So here's talking about document 2, and that was the New Republic. And they wanted that treat. They wanted the lead, document 2. And here, liberals, that is the outside information. Worded a little bit differently than that original example I gave you, but it's really good. It shows these are liberals, that's why they wanted it. It shows why they had that view. But I had a lot of from everybody. It's good. And I'm not kidding when I say those people here got, let's say, a B. They didn't get an A. The big thing was just not enough outside information. Maybe they're repeated, which is easy to do. But it was nothing big. It was no like, oh, no. No, just close. Good job. Do we just quit for the year and just roll the die? I think so. Let's do it. Good luck, everybody. All right, so I've got a couple of assignments to give you down the road, but I did change. I told you I was doing a little bit of a test on Thursday. It's going to be different. It's going to be a lot heavier. Write it on a block. Throw it at you. It's just going to be a matching on chapter 23. The very basic matching from those things and 2 short IDs. So I made it a little bit smaller. And the short IDs, I'm going to pick the kind of 3 of the big things from World War I for one choice. 3 of the big things from the 20s we're doing right now. So like, with the conditions of Europe, you have led the war, total war, why American Union? One of those three. Your other choice will be, like the Red Summer, Red Scare, politics of the 20s, and one for the 20s. Just two short IDs. I don't think it'd take more than 20 minutes. It's gonna be really basic. Sound good? I wanted something simple because we just had a big DB. Sound good? And then I will give you a spring break assignment. I should have it on Friday. So I'll give it to you a week early. So if you want to get anything done, and an extra credit. Very basic assignment. And then we will go back and we'll get certain parts of World War II, but then jump right into the Cold War after spring break. We will go back after the exam and I'll do a little bit more on World War II to kind of fill in a few blanks, and it's interesting after the text. All right, so let's get back to this piece of paper. This. You're done. That's good, right? What do you consider? What was the law that restricted immigration? What was that called? Yeah. And what part of Europe? Did we get to eugenics?
Yeah. We just mentioned.
What part of Europe did they yeah. And no immigrants from any place else? Yes. And then we had, oh, do we have the Harlem Renaissance in here? Okay, so we'll do that here in a sec. We did Red Summer. Oh, so we finished the video. So I'm gonna go through a couple things for your review, so I'm gonna go really fast. Well, let's get right to here. So eugenics, did we talk about this at all? Yeah. Yeah, that's the idea of selective breeding. The big thing they would talk about is how they would say this, the white race is gonna be diluted. And so it really was about race. And I like this, we can't have the inbred, heredity is a big problem. Just like how dairymen breed cattle, we should be breeding humans. This is highly social Darwinist. This is very social Darwin. This is like the epitome. This is the extreme social Darwinism. And I should add that the fascist countries across Europe would adopt this. They love eugenics. Fascism and social Darwinism are kind of like the equivalent, even though we all have elements of them. So let's get to one thing about this. The Harlem Renaissance, though, despite segregation, despite not living in areas that were isolated from other parts of town, not able to go places, a real urban culture was created. We're saying urban because they're all in big cities, remember, because of sundown towns. Because of the great migration, blacks coming north, segregated from white neighborhoods, but then bringing music, and they kind of adopted a separate culture. And one, I didn't put this down. I don't think I wrote this down, but I should have. But this is part of the reason why this is going to be called the Jazz Age, because of music that was very much from combination of music that was developing in the South, and same deal, isolated, segregated areas, combined with the band music, really popular big band, marching band music, combined into jazz, which I just find amazing. John Philip Sousa and Cab Calloway, I find that amazing. But jazz music, and many of the first musicians were African Americans, but then it would become very much an American thing. And I do like 20s era jazz. One of the most famous clubs that would have this in New York City would be called the Cotton Club. And I've walked by it 3 times. And all 3 times I've been there, they have tours of it. They didn't have tours at the time when I was there. So I'm very sad. And we just find the nature, you're traveling, and it's hard to get a time right, but we weren't able to go there either. But I would really like to see it. So that's where we get this idea of the roaring 20s. And and so a lot of this, as we saw in the video, was a myth. It's all, you always talk about the fun and the glamour of the 20s. And this is a big deal about the 20s is going to have this reputation because the 30s and then into the 40s were so different. Great Depression didn't go. And so it was looking back and saying, weren't things better? And then, of course, people always gloss over. Not always, but most of the time gloss over the way things used to be. We have a lot of that. Things were so much better today. I mean, you really can tell this. And this was also a time seen of great prosperity. Well, there was prosperity, but as we saw in the video, they did such a great job. It was very uneven. But one more important element, this idea of the individual, worshiping the individual, and this myth of the individual creating the United States. This goes back to the Industrial Revolution, about like Horatio Alger's stories about rags to riches, but also all these myths about the American West. It's no coincidence that many of the most popular early movies are going to be, the individual cowboy, alone. In fact, cowboy was seen as somebody who was cowboy. That was kind of a degrading name. That was an insult. But in the 20s, with the movement at that time, it became this individual, no one's helping them. Well, this also kind of justifies then the great wealth being created by just a few. But the reality, it's really important to understand, it starts with a very bad depression, Red Scare, flu, Red Summer, and ends with nearly the end of the entire financial system. Speaking of that, so early afternoon, early morning, it looked like a few more banks might be in trouble, but it stabilized in the afternoon, even though their stock values crashed. So I think we have a few weeks of no financial disaster. All right, enjoy yourself. So actually, it looked better by afternoon, even though there's still huge problems. Basically, some undercapitalized banks. Maybe someday I'll tell you about that. Wouldn't that be a great thing to talk about FDIC and insurance and Glass-Steagall? Tuesday. New Deal. That's New Deal stuff. So this all relates. I should add, speaking of that, now it's time to see what you remember. Remember inflation, deflation? Does inflation help? Inflation help creditors, those who loan the money, or debtors, those who borrow? It helps debtors, right? So right now, debtors are being able. Banks made a bunch of decisions hoping there would be inflation. And that's what's killing them. They loaned a bunch of money out and now they're getting money on less value. That's what we. We talked about that in class. History echoes, and we can see the same things over and over again. So when I talk about something in the 1830s, you think this will never relate. Well, sure, we're never going to have Andrew Jackson against president because he's dead, but the same kind of financial systems do apply. It's amazing how they go around and around again. Speaking of that, New Year's Eve. Okay, so and also think about parades. The vigilante parade is coming. Don't forget. If you build a giant elk in the parade, an elk big enough to take down power lines, you'll get 10 bucks extra credits. That's what. Who wants to make it out? This is actually a Missoula. I would love that, but somebody would complain when it knocked out power for the town. Speaking of that, the vigilante parade is on May 5th. That happens as luck would have it the same day as your test. Isn't that awesome? So we did this last year and we had a very good parade last year. It was really good. And so we're going to do the same thing, and all the American history teachers are going to give extra credit for anybody who participates in building a float. Now I know what you're saying. Well, wait, I'm probably doing fine, but is that pretty good? If you work on the float with somebody, I know you have to do the test, but work on it the day before, I'll give you extra credit. And what they did last year is a bunch of students did that, and they took pictures and sent it to me. remind me, and I can't remember exactly what it is. But you have to get, but I want you to film your entire life. Film.
Strap it, throw it off, and seal it.
I don't know what you're doing with this other arm, but this is film. What do you play? A bassoon? That's good to march with. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. All right. So remind me of that. I will give credit for that if you work on a flow. I'll give you some extra credit. And it's just fun to do. We do need those. You do have to come. We'll talk about it. I'll make it worth your while. All right. So let's get to what's happening. This really is a very idea of conservatism. And it's not just in foreign policy or economics. There's a cultural conservatism that's happening. And it is somewhat social Darwinistic, but also a new form of Protestant Christianity, about 10 or 12 years old when the decade begins, called fundamentalism. And this idea of fundamentalism, they claim to go back to, they literally called it old-timey religion. I love that, old-timey. That was really literally the term. This is old-timey. And they're going to go back to like a strict reading of the scripture. Actually, that's not the way older religion was. And strict reading of the scripture, I mean, that's the Puritans. But fundamentalism was very much our fear of the new modern society, of modernism. And this idea that we're changing too fast, which, yeah, it was changing really fast. And the fundamentalist explosion would be fueled by these new radio preachers. Here's Billy Sunday. It would give these fire and brimstone, or literally heaven or hell, sermons. And they were literally called charismatics. And they would bring people in through their charisma. So as an element of the Second Great Awakening, but with a new modern twist. There was a series of pamphlets that we put together in a book called The Fundamentals of the Christian Faith in 1910. So that's where the term comes from. But is it really that fear of modernizing? Because it seemed like society was changing so fast. You have demands for now, women's rights and the right to vote, African Americans moving north. We have the progressive reforms. We have prohibition, which divided people a lot of times on faith. Also, don't forget the flu. Don't forget the bad economy and those crazy cars. But there's something else going on. People are fearful of losing their status in society. And you see this in conservative revivals. We saw in the 1970s. So, for example, there was a real fear amongst men who thought they might lose their position because women were demanding equal rights. Now, the only real right that women got a huge right, but the right to vote. They still did not have political or legal economic rights. But it just seemed like they're losing status. Or whites in the North thought they were losing status as blacks in the North came to big cities and started culturally changing culture and getting new jobs. Or immigrants coming in. That fear of losing status is a real issue. I mean, most people don't have much. Remember Bacon's Rebellion? They don't have much. But where you are in society means a lot. And so this will help lead to nativism. Someone mentioned this first period, and I thought that was a really good point. It does tie into nationalism. I didn't type that in, but I thought that was a really good point. It is nationalism, that this fear of other countries coming in, it works together. And it's very social Darwinism. And we all have elements, even if you say, well, I don't really believe there's a natural hierarchy, but you still don't want to lose the position you have. There's always that fear. A lot of times, if you're on top, someone's striving for equality, trying to reach the same level. It might feel to you as they're coming up that you're losing status. Like there's only so much status in the world. There's only so much power. And a few more things. So this means it was I go back to this idealized. And so it's so amazing. In the 30s, I'll look back in the 20s, but a lot of people in the 20s will look back in the 1890s, before the war, before the progressive movement and all those changes that happened, before before women could vote, women knew their place, but now they're demanding rights. And me saying that, no, that was a really common statement. They knew their place. In the 1970s, this is going to be talked a lot about for women and African Americans who demanded equal rights. Wait a minute, when people knew their place, society seemed so much better. But don't forget that video when they talk about the relationship between people of different color and classes. And they didn't really connect. They didn't know each other. And so if you don't really know the way other people feel, you can't empathize and you can't understand why they might want a better life or that their life wasn't just fine. If things are going good for you, shouldn't it be going good for everybody? That's one thing I like about that video about the 20s. You notice the different classes. And people with more money, what was their attitude like? It's great. We have to work our tails off. Everybody has a different point of view. And it's important to empathize. Here, there's not a lot of empathy. And so, here's an example of how this played out. Jazz music was causing people, essentially the equivalent of alcohol, intoxicating kids. This was a pretty common thing. Now everybody said, oh, those crazy kids in the 20s. Rock and roll music was doing this. I just read an article about how R&B music was doing this from the 1990s, which just made me laugh really hard because I just know that always goes on, these things. Now it's the TikTok. Okay, so with that. So this goes monkey tribe. So this is a review from the video, just make sure we have it. Remember that was that Dayton, Tennessee, they wanted to get themselves on the map. About teaching evolution was against the law. So then let's do a test case. William Jennings Bryan, Clarence Darwell, so all the things we saw in the video. Scopes were found guilty. But this was a real example of that fear of modernism. If we don't teach kids these things, they won't have to worry about the big changes. Bryan was fearful of social Darwinism. And looking back at it, that seemed a little bit naive on his part. But the big thing was that fear of science. And science represents the new, different. And it is scary. Change is scary. That's one thing that's really good about classes like this. Hopefully we're learning that change isn't that scary. Or not as scary. Yes.
If they did science, why did they use science to justify like social?
That's a very valid point, and I have no easy answer to that. And so it would be more like, well, we like the science then that justifies what we do. And the science that makes us scared, we don't. Confirmation bias is a really good way to put it. Nazi Germany, which was intensely social Darwinistic, despised science. Despised it. But they like the science that justified what they did. Yeah, they kicked out most of their scientists in the 1930s. This is me now being a little biased against Nazi Germany. I'm really glad they did. That would have been pretty scary if they would have kept all their scientists, if they would not have been so crazy. Little things like, I'm just throwing things out there like the atomic bomb, things like that. I'm glad they didn't have one. So, this is been a headline from this time, the fear of science being taught in our schools. It's the Onion, remember that. I just thought this was really pretty funny. Should children be exposed to facts? No! We got to stop that right now. And that's not at all an issue today. Yes. Represent that change. And science sometimes, science could be a very empirical proof that your ideology of what you thought you would do is. That is hard. So I'm not saying, I have great empathy for this, even though I'm a firm believer in science and learning. I'm biased towards that. But at the same time, I empathize. Nobody likes to be proven they're wrong. Yes. Yeah, that's their mocking Italians. That was an Italian anti-Italian slur. So it's making fun of that very dark method when cycling say the murder were executed for murder just because they're basically Italian immigrants. We saw that in the video. And so the politics of the 1920s intensely conservative. Isolationist. The economic system was trickle-down economics, which has its roots in laissez-faire economics. And we have culturally conservative. Which is kind of the fundamentalism. So many people, when they say they're conservative today, it's kind of a cultural thing. It's rarely do they know this. Not that they're not smart, it's just the way society is. But the United States really want to act like we were the most prosperous country, even more prosperous than the Romans, which that whole thing just kind of makes me laugh in a dark way, but I found that amusing. But really idealizing this idea of a part of the reason the United States has such prosperity is the rest of Europe destroyed each other. So, election 1920, just a quick review. Harding and Coolidge. Harding was corrupt, didn't really know what he was doing. But the return to normalcy, doesn't that fit right in with this conservative idea? Going back to the good old days. Boy, weren't the 1950s. Yeah, that was such a foundational thing, but we see this conservative argument all the way through this day. I know, but I was just thinking my point of view. When I was growing up, I can still vividly remember we're going back to the 50s.
Okay.
So my thought process always comes back to that. During the conservative revival of the late 1970s, 1980s, it was to go back to the 50s, and that's where Ronald Reagan had the "Let's Make America Great Again." We were so great in the 50s. And yes, Donald Trump copied it completely. Because he assumed, probably correctly, that most people wouldn't have known that he copied it. And the Democrats ran a relatively conservative James Fox, but the reason I put that in here is because of him. Franklin Roosevelt was the Undersecretary of the Navy and a very young man, up-and-coming politician that's gifted, just shockingly skilled politician, would be his vice president. And even though they're not going to win, it seemed to be his coming out party. 2 years later, everything would change. Does anyone know what happened 2 years later? Polio, and he would be paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. We'll get back to how amazing of a man Franklin Roosevelt was in a lot of ways. And remember, Debs ran from a prison cell. Look at the blue for Democrats, just the solid South. I mean, this was a sweep. And I can't understate the importance of the flu. The flu was so awful. People wanted to get back before there were masks, before they couldn't go out in public, before schools were literally held outside because they needed the air circulation. You know, pandemics make people crazy. Not that you would know anything about that, but it's true. And it does lead to a lot of these. Let's get back to the way it was before. In fact, that really was the appeal of Joe Biden. It was kind of like this, you know, he's been around forever. Let's go back to when we didn't have this pandemic. That really did appeal. And it appealed to the Republican Party in the state of Montana. The Democrats were in power. Let's go back to when they weren't. Maybe we'll have the flu, coronavirus. So, as we know, don't worry about Doherty or Forbes. Don't worry about that. But that's, you had the affairs, you were drinking, played cards. I mean, Harding was, it's kind of amazing he was president. I don't think so as much anymore, but especially then, it seems so amazing. But the Teapot Dome was the biggest scandal. Albert Ball, the Secretary of the Interior, sold away the U.S. Navy oil reserves that were stored in this weird mountain called Teapot Dome in Wyoming. But this scandal would become public after Harding had his heart attack. But every Republican is going to be tainted by this. Fortunately for the Republicans, the Vice President Coolidge never had anything to do with it. In fact, he just hung out in Vermont the whole time as vice president. And so he was there when he heard Harding had a heart attack. So scandal ridden. Coolidge be vice president, be elected for one term. And America, or the business of America, is business. And there's a slogan. I wanted you to look at that, read that slogan. Somebody made a little meme. They were actually making this as a positive thing. I'm not saying it's positive or negative. I want you to think about it yourself. But it's important to know what philosophy that is. Don't expect to build up the wheat by pulling down the straw. What philosophy is that? That's pure social darwinism. The idea being that the weak are supposed to be weak. Why would you ever weaken everybody else to help them? They're supposed to be on the bottom. We have natural hierarchies. It's also laissez-faire. And that pulling up, this is at a time where that, you ever heard the saying, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps?
Yeah.
So the straps, those little things on your boots, you use it to pull up. And the whole idea is you pull yourself up. Now, I want you to ponder that for a second. Can you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Literally. If you reach down and pull, what's going to happen? It's going to fall on your face. It was meant to be satire. It was not meant to be like this saying to go get it. It was meant to say, the person who made that up, we are all in this together. You can't do it yourself. We are a nation. We are a commonwealth. We'll do it together. So I always find it amusing when people say to do it yourself. Yeah.
After having died.
Yeah. He gets to the election. He run for one term. 1924. And so 24, it's almost like. So Coolidge and the Democrats ran a very, even more economically conservative man named John Davis, who basically just ran against immigrants and ran against blacks demanding rights, literally. So the progressives jumped in, the former governor or the former senator now, or governor, now senator from Wisconsin, Robert La Follette. There's Robert La Follette giving a speech. I love the old microphone. He's really getting into it. I kind of like that. But here, the Democrats just basically said, keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. But Coolidge said, look at the prosperity. Everyone has a full dinner pail. That's what you brought for lunch. That was your lunch box. Was a dinner. That's what that was. And the next president, Hubert Heaver, he would have a chicken in every pot. Same kind of thing. And this really shows that both candidates were very pro big business and monopolies. And it's a cartoon against them, but it's true. They were. And the election, La Follette was from Wisconsin, so he won there. He's trying to carry on the Teddy Roosevelt square deal, Woodrow Wilson, New Freedom, but that's no. Solid South, that's it. And very much laissez-faire. Laissez-faire. In fact, he's bragging about it. That's another slogan that I stole someone's meme, but I kind of like the big business at the cash register. Cash register was about 19 years old. What a friend we have in Coolidge. That's one of the more famous ones. Election of 28, Hubert Heaver would run. Hoover, I have to focus on saying Hoover. Hoover was Secretary of Commerce, remember the Food Administration, great reputation. And he was not quite as laissez-faire as Coolidge, but he was just as, he had the same basic beliefs. Al Smith, what we consider kind of economically moderate. He's from New York. He was Catholic. Even though he didn't say it, he appeared to be against prohibition, so that was wet. Prohibition by 1928, people were getting tired of it. 22, 23 was the grand experiment. 28, no. And then the Great Depression hit. We got it. But he's very urban. And yes, we've had urban candidates before. But before the 20s, there was not live radio. In fact, you rarely ever heard a president. You would only read about it. So what their voice was didn't matter. 24, there was limited broadcasts across the country. 28 was the first time where they had the big broadcasting companies. The big ones were RKO, the thing called CBS, you might have heard of it, and then Red and Blue NBC. And they could broadcast nationwide live. They used telephone. Nationwide. And so now you could hear the candidates from New York. You could hear them in Helena, hear them in Peoria. Think about the 20s and prohibition going on. Oh, there's the chicken in every pot. I wonder if that will come back to haunt Hoover in about a year. So let's listen to Smith. Here's a narrator. Now, the Catholic bias was big, there's no doubt about it. But might there have been another thing going on? I had this recording. I made a recording of an old cassette tape. So I haven't been able to find it as good as this. Isn't that awesome? Fatty audience. Isn't that awesome? My first thought is a cartoon character, but think about the 20s. If you're sitting here in any place other than New York City, what does he sound like to you? Maybe. Think about the 20s. Does he kind of sound like a gangster? I should add, everyone's smoking this, so he's probably smoking, 5 or 10 pounds of tobacco pipe. That's why you hear people back then, have a device like this, male or female. That's because everyone was smoking. Yeah, and so it scared people. So they already heard he's a Catholic, so you can't trust him. He belongs to the Pope and listen to him. So the election, even a bigger victory for Hubert Heber. So let's get really quick. So I have this consumer economy. So we talked about mass production during the video. Just to remind you, they got to sell these goods. That means individual workers have got to buy stuff. Before this era, you didn't have that. Most of the entities that bought the goods produced were other producers, like railroads. But now, workers have got to buy stuff. And if they don't have the money, they need access to credit, debt. And that's where you start getting companies with installment plans. Here's a General Motors thing bragging about how many cars they're selling on installment plans. Not only installment plans, you sell the car, you can mark it on your sales report, but then the company gets interest. These companies that sell on credit, their profits are almost all based upon selling on credit. General Motors' most profitable arm is their financial section. It's not the selling of the cars to this day. It's the loaning of the money. And so installment plans, buying on credit. And here's a chart of the percentage of household debt in the United States. Less than 20% compared to the gross domestic product. Now it's getting close to half the size. Now it's about 90% today. I should also add the blue line is the percentage of income going to the top 5%. Went up the whole decade. Credit. Consumer economies need credit because most people can't afford to buy things now. Pay for it all at once. Credit cards are coming, 1950. The first real credit card. And I was just thinking about that. Because my wife and I use a credit card, we pay it back every month. So we're what the banks call deadbeats. Because we pay before we have to pay interest. Called deadbeats. I like that. That's the banker term. They want people to pay interest. But how much people buy stuff on credit? Use a credit card, you're borrowing the money to buy. People do that all the time. And think how the economy functions. If you don't have a bank account, you can't really participate. It's a big deal. And you're coming very close to the age. They're going to start harassing you for credit cards. Be very wary of credit cards. Moving on. So Henry Ford's a classic example of that. Ford would start back in 1913, giving $5 a day. That isn't, okay, there's been a lot of inflation. That wasn't huge pay, but it was bigger than most industrial jobs, with the idea being, you'll buy a car from Ford. He was buying loyalty. He said, you work hard, you get $5 a day. You'll have your job tomorrow, being long-term employment, and buy a Ford. And they did. They bought Fords, and other companies did this. And this new bargain that would begin to be established in the 20s, fall apart in the Great Depression, but would be the bargain that I grew up with, even though it was starting to go away by the 1970s. You work hard, you have a job, you know you're secure, you can afford to buy things in the future. And why did they do that? He did not invent the assembly line, but he perfected it in many ways. Standardization of parts. You can buy a Ford any color you want it, as long as it's what? So you don't have to worry about other colors. Now, of course, like General Motors, this company called Plymouth, they would make, work with a chemical company called DuPont to make better paint. And eventually they have colors, but the point is economies of scale. Economies of scale. Here's men working on the engine. You work at one thing over and over again. All the parts fit. You become very good. Production goes up. Productivity went up 43% in the decade. Meaning, a worker by the end of the decade, or I'm sorry, you produce 43% more per worker by the end of the decade. That means more profit. It's not the most productive time. Anybody know when the most productive time in American history was? Where the amount per worker went up dramatically, the most dramatic. The 1950s and 1960s. Nothing compares. And cost drop, production goes up. Give you an idea. By the end of the decade, a Model T was only $269. You put $10 down, you can get a car. And they produce in a car every 93 seconds, 5 million a year by 29. Do you see a problem with this though? You're building 5 million a year. What if you buy a car in 1928? You're going to buy a car in 1929? Probably not. One more big thing before you leave. Cars will come to dominate the economy. What do you need? What do you need to make a car? So even before you get to the gas, what do you need to make a car? Steel, copper, rubber, which you can't just, here, rubber. It means you have to have, like, Ford would carve out an area bigger than Connecticut in Brazil, called it Fordlandia, just for rubber. You need copper, steel, light bulbs, maybe radio. What else do you need? What? Yeah, battery. You got to have some kind of battery, which they had to come up with a more efficient battery. How about glass that won't shatter and knock and gouge out the eyes of the driver? A little thing, right? What about gas? Where do you get gas from? We call it gas. So you just dig it up and then throw it in the engine, right? You have this entire process of, okay, mining the coal and iron, not just this, mining the coal, digging the oil out, pipelines or railway cars to get it to a refinery, which is not an easy thing. So you need this entire skill set and engineers and college. We're just talking to drive a car down. Well, we might need something else. And then you have to have a way to get it to customers, right? Then what else do you need? I got a car, I have gas. Now what do you need?
Need a buyer.
Okay, we need a whole system of selling it, and so an entire distribution system. Now I bought a car. Well, you have to be a whole system to teach people. You need rules and laws. You're forgetting one really big thing. A road. You gotta have a road. You can't just say, I'm gonna drive down the. You have to have engineers to make it. You need something to, dirt roads are problematic. So you need asphalt, you need cement. Okay, you're driving down the road. I'm hungry. What do you need? You need a system of like restaurants and things for cars, repair shops, right? What if you're tired? So you need a hotel for motorists. Wait for, what do you call a hotel for motorists? Motel. Now, wait, one thing before you go. What happens to people that buy cars? Won't that affect everybody from the miner to the person making the cars, the person running the hotels? You see a problem down here. All right, on that happy note, goodbye. Try to get, maybe I'll see if I can get it tomorrow, okay? Tomorrow, when are you leaving?
Next one.
I'll try to get it somewhere.
Okay, thank you.
I understand, 'cause that's why I tried to get there late.
Yeah.
And I know you'll do it. All right, yeah, I'm fine.
Hi.
Bye, bye.
Hi.
Did you say hi or bye, Jesse? Hi.
Wait, so we don't have a quiz today? I think it's quiz. Like it's gonna be like an extra test instead of the little quiz. So like the quiz will be like this. I think. I hope, because I didn't read it. I did like half of it. Oh, I don't have like a quarter of it. Why did you read it? Because he's here for Thursday. I am busy now.
You get the notes, I know.
No, I don't want that.
Right? Yep, no, it's. Wow.
So we don't have a quiz today?
No. Well, I'm gonna make things easy. No, we're gonna do it on Thursday. And instead of having, I told you that'd be a few months for things, we're just gonna do like a quiz on 23. On that, we're gonna do it on Thursday. With 2 short ideas.
Oh,
So it'd be a little bit shorter than I originally thought, but I still want you to do 2 short ideas. One from kind of World War I topics and then one from one. I thought about it, I thought, let's just do one at once, get it done, unless you want to do it today. I thought that would be the easiest. All righty, everybody. You need this guy too with the 20s video. And so what I'm gonna do? Okay, did you like it? Yeah. I really like it. If you haven't tried out, that's not like margin or because 10%. Just really like it is. They're not much more than first. So you only have 10% on there just so that they buy. Yeah, what margin is you buy for this? You only have to 10%. Okay. So that's up to you. So that encourages.
So remember they said like the 60 for 600 or whatever, or
Yeah.
600 for 6,000.
See, and they went over, I know they kind of talked about really, you got it. All right, everybody. First thing is first, let's talk DB2. William has kicked out because he's been bad. Telling presidents. Like that. Okay, so this is out of 100. I also kind of weighed the score on the rubric. Got all things. Bent, folded. I thought people did very well on this. Yeah, paper. Oh, no. Pleased with them. We'll talk just very briefly about them. Do you think in this overall people like facts? So I was carrying some of these out Friday to go go home, and I was doing great if you at home, and it was snowing. Yours got snow on it. So and I looked down, just filled with snow. It was snowing hard Thursday. So Friday afternoon. Well, snow tonight too, like maybe. The biggest thing I put down for a lot of people is OI, outside information, and or context, whose context had background material. But I thought people did very well. I'm always going to look for more outside information, and I try to put an arrow like you need more explanation on irreconcilable reservation is. In fact, that was the biggest problem that people have. If they didn't get an A, was just not having enough facts, not having enough outside information, and that's something either you forgot, you should have prepared better. Doesn't matter. I know you can improve on that. But most people understood the documents, organized it pretty good. A few times there was a repeat. People talked a little bit about, like, talking a lot of times about the arguments of the reservations a couple of times in paragraphs. But I thought it was good. But OI means outside information. I put a little check that you normally just means good job, good job. And but good docs, good organization. I guessed on the thesis, I guess on most of those. I put down a Q, that means you didn't quite address the question. The question, it's that statement. The strength of the opposition forces rather than the aptitude and stubbornness of President Wilson. So I needed something to address the Wilson and Senate opposition and the treaty. It's not a huge deal, but that's something you just need to have a strong thesis. And if I put down BP, that's a blueprint, but more people have it. I thought it was very good. So GD are good, you have to check good. OI though, put outside information, put outside information, put outside information. It's not enough to just simply say they were opposed to the treaty. You know, say something to the effect of because they had conservative beliefs or they were reservationists or they were irreconcilable. Add something more. Or like Henry Cabot Lodge was the leading Republican not invited to Versailles. Add that a little bit of additional information. But I thought it was good. Let's get over context one more time, really quick, for context. And this is something I know when you write an essay for a lot of classes, and I remember being taught this too. In an opening paragraph, you give kind of like a little background of what you're going to write. Not for this. Give me the background or the cause, the events that led up to the main point of the question. If the question is about the ratification battle, tell me about things like World War I ended. What's in the Treaty of Versailles? So there's events of 1818, 1918, 1919. Wilson trying his 14 points. Germany being punished. The war ending with horrific casualties, and they thought they would never have to fight this type of war again. Then get to the thesis, and then all the elements of this, your essay will be about the ratification. And if you have time, in the conclusion, what came out of this? Isolationism, the growth of right-wing radicalism, or the Nazis in Germany, things like that. But that's context, the events that led up to it. So I had a few people not get enough of that, but I thought it was a good essay. Good organization. Most people did quite well. I'm always going to be looking for outside information. Always. And so like for context, I put on 1918, 1919. That's what I was talking about. Oh, Article 10. It had to have for this essay the most controversial issue, Article 10, which was a document, document 3. You also needed your irreconcilables, reservations, Democrats loyal to Wilson, and also hoping liberal and conservative, those two different points of view. You didn't need all of them. You kind of did need your irreconcilables and reservations. You had to have them. All right. So let's look at a couple examples. Here is, oh, we're still recording from third period. So I don't know if you guys knew this. But it was icy this morning. Just notice. And we got 2 emails. I'm not saying this is bad, but it's kind of funny. Telling us